You download the prerequisite 400 gigabyte game because Western games are insane. Get a little cozy, you get your blanket, you get your controller or your keyboard setup, whatever it is, and then all of a sudden, BAM! You whip out your popcorn and you get yourself a little Sony pop because guess what? You were actually watching a movie the whole time. Time to watch a bunch of dialogue that might not be good. Watch our cutscenes to justify our gameplay. Okay, I might be exaggerating a little bit with that. I think Sony exclusives in general have pretty good storytelling. I just think that this particular meme was amusing to me. When it comes to me, I'm not someone who's very motivated when it comes to video games by story. Part of it is my inability to sit still. Like, I really struggle to sit through movies if I'm not feeling it. I've gotten better at it over time, but like movie marathons are my personal hell. However, honestly, I think that the biggest contributor to me not really enjoying a lot of video game stories or not being able to sit through a lot of them is the fact that I feel like a lot of them are very cookie cutter. Like, a lot of the story just exists to get you from point A to point B or to introduce like a new fun gameplay mechanic to you. Like, truthfully, if I had a choice to sit through what I feel like is very stereotypical and not great dialogue, or actually play the game that I signed up for, I would always choose to want to play the game. This doesn't mean that I don't like story in video games per se. I think that you can do it really well and you can really entrap me in, like, with Red Dead Redemption or The Last of Us or, Baldur's Gate. And then there's plenty of like visual novels that I've done that I think are pretty interesting, but those are like purely story games. I don't know if they count so much. My issue with video game stories is that, to me, a lot of the time they feel kind of phoned in just as an excuse to have like writing or story or something to push the game along in some way. Like, they're giving you an excuse to interact with the world, which I don't ever think is as interesting as people who are making it intend on being. So I'm more often than not just like skipping and blazing through, dialogue options, or I'm staring at a skip button during a cutscene because I just can't sit still long enough through it because I don't care enough. So of course this is all about tabletop role-playing games and Dungeons and Dragons, so what exactly does my inability to sit still during just like mediocre cutscenes in a video game have to do at all with this genre of games? Well, have you ever personally been in a game, either running it or playing it, where everyone's kind of treating it like a waiting room, where everyone's just twiddling their thumbs, they're looking around trying to find something interesting, maybe they're doodling, maybe they are playing with a little toy, or maybe they're on their phone and they are looking through Twitter, or even worse, maybe they're falling asleep. Because I have definitely run games like that, and I've definitely played in games like that. There are a ton of contributing factors to why a game might not be hooking a lot of players, or why a lot of people might be bored, and each of them, are all very special and more nuanced, and they all deserve their own special little, discussion. However, there's one contributing factor to games that I think can really be worked on a lot, and it's something that I very specifically try to work on as a DM, and I think as I've worked on it, has made my games significantly more engaging for the players at my table. And I say this with so much love for dungeon masters and creators and people who work in these fields and like pour in love every single week, but sometimes as a dungeon master, you just gotta shut up. You just gotta zip it. Talk less. As a dungeon master and as someone who, does yap a lot, as evident by this YouTube channel and my YouTube scripts, I get the feeling to want to talk a lot and feel silence. I definitely can, if I really want to, put myself in the position where I can just ramble and make something interesting if I really wanted to, or if I really tried. But more often than not, if I'm filling in silence, it's not as interesting as it should be. The last thing that I would want for my players is to feel like that, like me playing a video game, where they're just desperate to skip a cutscene or skip through dialogue options because they're not really doing anything for them. Because that's me. I'm that kind of player. I can't sit still. Of course, that doesn't mean don't talk at all, don't take things as ultimatums. But if your players look bored at your table, you should really consider the ratios at which they are talking versus how much you are talking. And I would like to say that I can see where this problem comes from, because as a DM, I have definitely felt that moment where players are a little bit too quiet, they aren't interacting with the world enough, and so you feel the need to have to like fill in silence because no one's talking at the table. And that could be just like for plenty of different reasons. Maybe they're just not feeling it today, maybe they aren't feeling good, or God forbid someone's being shy at a table. There are plenty of moments where a table is a little bit quiet and nobody's talking and nobody's interacting, and so it's kind of the DM's job to step in and kind of invigorate the table and bring things up. So in those moments, I think it's good to talk. But my point is if your players are already talking to people, they are interacting with your world, and they're engaging with their fellow players at the table, I think it's good as a DM step back, show a little bit of restraint. Not every moment needs to be cut off with an NPC or some dramatic line from narration. You don't need to narrate over every single little thing. You can just let your players play the game and you can just enjoy that and let them enjoy the moment. Of course, again, there's plenty of nuance in that. Sometimes some players are talking way too long and you do need to cut them off so that someone else can have their moment. But generally speaking, I think, hey, if a players or your players at a table are all kind of being respectful and they were talking and they're engaged with each other, you don't need DM interruption. Just sit back. Let me kind of paint you an example of a game that I played in where the ratios were a little bit off to me. I mentioned this before, but as a player and especially as a DM, I am very hyper aware of how much time everyone at a table is kind of spending during the actual game of D&D and how much time they are getting to have their own moments. And sometimes if I'm feeling a little bit extra special or I'm like maybe just a little bit more bored than I should be, I start tracking like exactly down to the minute of how much time everyone's spending with their individual scenes and how impactful they are, and they're kind of like weighing that. That way that when I'm, especially as a DM, dispersing scenes across players or like letting them have their moments or determining like when to cut between different like scenes, I know like equally how much everyone has spent in the game. As a DM, it's like a really helpful skill to know when to like give someone a chance or even when to just like step back. Hey, I don't need to talk for this. I played in a campaign, and let me break down some of the math for you. It was like a 2 or 3 hour game. Most of the time, it ran for like 3 hours, so 180 minutes, right? Sometimes you go a little bit over, sometimes it's like 3.5. So, we're looking at like, 180 minutes to like 210, right? Pretty average, I feel like, gameplay time for a lot of people's games. So pretty standard. I keep track of how much the DM talks, how much different players talk. I do that kind of thing. So tell me, out of, let's say, 180 minutes, how much time did any of the players actually have a chance to talk or interact in this world? You think it'd be like 2 hours, hour and a half, an hour, 30 minutes? It was less than 20 minutes. We got to play the game or actually talk in that a total of less than 20 minutes. And even within those 20 minutes itself, the players were all separated. We were all having like our individual scenes, which meant the actual time that we got to come together, this is a, party kind of game where you are working together in a party. The time that the players actually got to meet and talk to each other out of those 20 minutes was 2 minutes, less than that. For those 20 minutes, it was almost like you were watching X amount of people play solo D&D for like a short amount of time. Like essentially all of us only got to RP with the DMs in separate occasions, all waiting for each other to have their turn instead of kind of playing together. And I know that I can be a little bit, critical of things. I'm pretty much critical of everything that I watch and everything that I play in. So I don't want to be too harsh on people. So I was curious how other people felt. And some of the other players would actually just fall asleep during games. And I didn't really know this because I had joined in later to this campaign. But yeah, some players would just fall asleep on the middle of a call during this game because there were such long pauses before they could even do anything. Because these players weren't being given the chance to actually do anything or play the game that they signed up for. You could be sitting for 2 to 3 hours not saying a single word because it's not your turn yet. And all of that extra time was just the DM talking. It was a lot of the DM talking. We're just hearing narrative and narration and other NPCs that have nothing to do with some of our characters. And so we're just sitting around not being able to do anything because we're maybe not in that scene or not even in that part of the town. Imagine sitting through like any video game where like 80 to 90% of it, you're just not able to actually participate in the game that you bought. I understand the need as a dungeon master to kind of want to narrate and just like spill out your guts and say everything that you can to your players because you are very passionate about all these ideas and you want to let it out and tell the world, I get and I understand the need to yap. It's important to give players the space to actually enjoy the game that they have in front of them. Let them play, let them do the role play, let them lead scenes. You don't always have to be the one leading scenes if you're a DM. Sometimes, of course, you gotta help people, right? But more often than not, people just want to play and they just want to role play and they just want to do cool things with their spells and they just kind of want to mess around with this world. And of course they can do the story and you can kind of guide them towards there. But if you're talking 90% of the time, it's no wonder that people might not care about your story. Because if you are presenting people with a world where they are supposed to be able to interact with things and become personally invested because they are taking the role of a character, they are not going to be invested if they're not actually getting to play the role of that character. You have to give people the space to actually breathe and enjoy your world and, you know, play with it in order for them to actually get invested at all. I think that any creative dungeon master, just like arts in general, right? It's really, really important to practice intentionality in everything that you do, especially when you are putting it out there for other people to, you know, consume in some way. I get wanting to just do like a cool monologue. I know everyone wants to be Brennan Lee Mulligan, but he is not good because he makes long-winded monologues. He's good because those monologues still make sense. You can't just say random words. If you're not able to monologue while having it make sense, then maybe don't monologue until you kind of build up that skill a little bit more, or practice in smaller doses. Make the game fun first, focus on that, let the players kind of breathe and have their moments, and then you can kind of build up to when you have those cool, really dramatic monologues, you can think about them a little bit more because you're not, you know, wasting all your breath. So I kindly ask dungeon masters everywhere to really consider just taking a break, talking less, letting your players have a moment to speak and play and interact with the world, and even just talk to each other, because that's a fun part of the game, is being able to actually interact with other characters that aren't the 50 NPCs the DM has in their head. And I get wanting to talk with all my NPCs, but the players are there to speak to each other, give them the chance. They should be leading the game, not you. And as a dungeon master, I just really appreciate it when my players take charge. I really do, because when they are leading scenes or making the choices for themselves and they are having the dramatic moments without me having to press them, I can just sit back and for once, I can take notes. I can actually take notes in my Obsidian document for the day. Because when you're talking, you can't take notes at the same time. Well, I mean, you might be able to, but I can't. So it's nice if they just do that, because it kind of lets you actually think and plan better scenes. And sometimes they say something in a conversation with another character that makes you think of something cool that you can put at the end of a session or something. Okay, that's it. Anyways, point is, if you are talking too much and you realize that you are talking 90% of your session, I feel like that's a problem and you should shut up. All right, thanks. Bye.